Welcome to Unmasking Social, where we talk about building real friendships and meaningful connections without masking who we truly are. I'm your host, Sharon Baum, a speech and language pathologist with an expertise in social thinking and how it relates to autism and ADHD, specifically with our teens and tweens. Let's dive in. On today's Candid episode, we don't hold anything back. We speak directly and honestly about ADHD and AuDHD and how screen time is really bringing us all down. We speak about how screen time is the path of least resistance for our children, teens, and tweens, and will often be the thing that they want to go to no matter what we tell them. We also speak about conflict and how conflict is something that people with ADHD and AuDHD are seeking out because it's a dopamine hit. So today's episode will be honest. As parents, as professionals, as individuals who are neurodivergent or neurotypical, listen, because I think a movement needs to be started in which we really, as a society, think about what the devices are doing to our children, teens and tweens, and then later adults. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Unmasking Social. Today on our podcast, we have a wonderful executive functioning episode. Executive functioning is not just a buzzword, and Michael McLeoud is here from GrowNOW to share more about why it's not just a buzzword and what it really, really means. Michael, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's a privilege to be here. I'm a huge fan of your podcast. Obviously, I found you from that incredible episode you had with the great Sarah Ward, one of the true pioneers of this executive functioning field. Loved that episode. Love everything she does, everything you're doing. Any SLP that also has time to do a podcast. I have a lot of respect for you guys.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you. And yes, Sarah Ward is fantastic. We all love her.
The best of the best.
But you are also amazing. And I know both of you focus on this executive functioning piece and overlap in some ways. You bring an interoceptive lens to it and a more, Sarah Ward does too, but in a different way. And you really focus on that internal piece, which I think sometimes we forget about, especially with our students who are neurodivergent and may have autism. So I'm just curious how you went on this journey. I know we share an alma mater. We both got our master's from Lehman College. Shout out to CUNY Lehman. No,
that's right.
I'm not getting any money for that, but it was a good experience for me as well. But so how did you go down this road? Now executive functioning is such a big, big thing and everybody talks about it, but a lot of people don't really understand it or what it truly means. So how did you get involved with working with individuals and their families with executive functioning needs?
Sure. So that's a great question. So one of my first years as a speech and language pathologist, I was being supervised by an apraxia specialist. And I can't tell you how refreshing it is to say the word apraxia and the person knows what it means who's interviewing me, which is great. So I don't have to take time to describe apraxia. But yeah, so I was working with an apraxia specialist, and we were working with this national group where it was specialized in boys and girls with chromosomal disorders. And pretty much all of the boys had apraxia. So I came along to learn about apraxia. And I learned very quickly from all the doctors, the neuropsychs, the incredible individuals down in Annapolis, Maryland, and Children's Hospital in DC. Not only did they all have apraxia, they also had ADHD. And I learned very, very quickly, and I was very naturally drawn to that as someone who grew up with ADHD and grew up with and still has it, obviously, it doesn't go away. But just in general, I was really naturally drawn to that. And I learned very quickly, now as a clinician, I was like, wow, there's really nothing out there for these kids. They're being sent to all these therapies and talk therapies and counseling and cognitive behavioral therapy, and nothing's moving the needle and nothing's improving long-term outcomes. So I spent so much time just diving so deep into the work of Dr. Russell Barkley, Dr. George McCloskey, Sarah Ward, who was so instrumental in my first couple of years. And I was lucky enough to see her present in person, and Kristen Jacobson, of course, from Cognitive Connections. And I was able to see some in-person presentations at school around here, tons of webinars. And I just dove so deep into the world of executive functions because I learned, just like everybody else learns, that ADHD is executive functioning. So I dove deep into the executive functioning world, developed the internal skills model, We did a year-long research study on it out here in the Philadelphia region, and everything has really just expanded from there.
Wow. So from apraxia to executive functioning,
You got it.
that could
That's
be the
right.
title of this podcast, right? I mean,
Yeah.
the interesting thing is apraxia also isn't spoken about enough, and there is an overlap, right, with the two of these. And with I'm saying even autism and apraxia sometimes coincide, and people don't even know it. So it's interesting how worlds do collide. But now you're here in this big space that's become a word, phrase, two words together that everybody speaks of. And I myself had the experience of working with someone who was going to all these different therapies, like you said, like CBT and DBT, and then they wanted an executive functioning coach, and I felt like a lot of what was happening was almost like there was a psychological component, which I understand, right, because it can affect you internally, but at the same time, I also felt like the therapies were not necessarily addressing the core issue, which was the language planning, the prioritizing, the organization. I mean, what is executive functioning and why are these therapies not addressing it?
Exactly. So a fantastic follow-up question. So ADHD is not an attention disorder. It's not about hyperactivity and inattentiveness. It is executive functioning developmental disorder. And basically what I do with the internal skills model is I break it down in the four pillars. Then there's the foundational skills, the two foundational skills. So really what executive functioning is number one, self-awareness, which is the
Hmm.
first executive skill to develop when they're young babies, and they start to recognize, hey, I have an impact on my world. When I cry, mom comes and holds me and changes me and sings to me, and I get milk and those kinds of things. And when I smile in mom's face, she smiles back. So you start to realize it's the very beginning of conditional thinking, if then cause and effect thinking of if this happens, then this happens. So it's one of the first to develop, and over time becomes one of the most delayed when you see it in the middle school years start to affect them socially. So self-awareness. Number two, self-regulation of emotions, language, body, behavior. So it's not hyperactivity, it's the inability to regulate your body. And it's not inattentiveness, it's the inability to regulate your mind and your thoughts. So it's all self-regulation. Dr. Russell Barkley talks about how it should be called self-regulation deficit disorder, because that's truly what it is. And then number three, what all parents really love to hear is self-motivation towards non-preferred tasks. So
Mm-hmm.
kids with ADHD and executive functioning challenges will have a very hard time doing anything that does not offer instant gratification, which is why in today's world you cannot discuss ADHD without also at the very same time discussing a very debilitating screen addiction. So these are the kids that are the biggest victim of big tech's predatory marketing of you need a phone to be successful. You need a phone to make friends. You need a phone to do all these things, which is we all know now is completely false. And it's the ADHD kids that can't regulate themselves that get completely lost in the virtual world of Roblox, Fortnite, Minecraft, YouTube, and the phone. And then we have self-evaluation, the ability to learn from past experiences and apply it to the present moment so we're not repeating that same mistake all the time. I refer to ADHD parenting as Groundhog's Day. Every single day is the same fight, the same argument, the same negotiation. You're dealing with bad morning routines all the way up until the last day of school, morning routine fights, homework fights, evening routine fights. ADHD parenting is true burnout parenting. So those are the four pillars, the four internal skills. And for decades, we thought it was time management and organization and messy backpacks and messy folders. But in
Right.
reality, you think about it, you're going to have a messy backpack unless you're first self-aware that that's even a problem. Then you have to be regulated and motivated enough to do that incredibly boring task of cleaning a backpack. Then you have to be able to self-evaluate and think, hey, in 2 periods, I'm going to have science class, and she's going to ask me to take out my lab notebook. Everyone's going to do it right away, but I'm going to be the one person with dirty, crinkled papers out of my backpack. I'm not going to like the way that feels, so I better clean it now. So those are the four pillars. So all these external band-aids of these external systems of like checklists and post-it notes and reward charts and all these different things, just they work for 2 weeks and they all fall apart because we're not treating the internal skills. Then the foundational skills are what Sarah Ward talks about so beautifully, the nonverbal and verbal working memory. the visual imagery and self-talk. When those two skills are working together in harmony, then we can harness the other skills. And the reason why talk therapy and counseling and cognitive behavioral therapy don't help these kids is because they're not rooted in working memory. ADHD is a performance disorder. So it's all about not being able to show what you know in the natural environment. So you can have an ADHD kid sit in an office with Dr. Russell Barkley himself 7 days a week. As soon as that session is over and they go home or they log off of that Zoom, that's not going to make them want to be on screens less, or curse at their parents less, or create conflict less, or do whatever gives them dopamine less. It's an inability to use your IQ, use your knowledge, show what you know. So you can't transfer it from a controlled environment with a third-party neutral therapist and then transition to it into the home. It's not going to happen.
Yeah, thank you for breaking that down so succinctly into the 4 pillars, because I think there is a misconception. Actually, I know there is a misconception with the D's, with the OCD. I'm so OCD, because of, I clean too much, which is
Oh, yeah.
wrong.
Correct.
Right. And then
Correct.
I'm oh my gosh, I have ADHD because I'm disorganized. And I think that, as you explained, it's way further than just being disorganized. You can be a disorganized person. That doesn't mean you have ADHD. ADHD is much more significant than that and needs a lot more support in terms of not just the individual themselves, but it sounds like the family. And I know you work with the families, and a lot of what you mentioned in terms of the 4 pillars overlaps with autism: self-awareness, self-regulation, motivation for non-preferred tasks, and needing that instant gratification. So I'm just curious, because what I observe with families, and I don't know if you observe it too, is a power struggle that occurs from day to night. And then what's happening is that parents are seeing their children as individuals who don't want to do any work. Teachers are saying that they don't want to do anything. I can't get them to do anything. I even recently I spoke to a teacher of a student who seems to be having executive functioning deficits. I collaborated with the OT in the school. She's seeing it too, as she herself has ADHD. So, but the teacher is saying, doesn't want to do work, and then the kid's crying. So it's a pattern, like you said, Groundhog's Day. How do we reduce that Groundhog's Day? How do we get everybody on board so that we don't have this power struggle? Or maybe I'm not understanding fully that maybe it isn't a power struggle.
So you're talking about productivity at school? Like, how do we improve productivity at
Yeah, like
school?
productivity in general, because again, I find that I've observed many parents in these situations with an individual with ADHD or AuDHD, especially a teen tween years where you definitely don't want to necessarily like listen to your parents. And then on top of that, they're trying to kind of force you to do a task. And if you don't do it, right, if you don't complete your homework, if you don't get here by this time, then you get rebuked for it. But then you keep getting rebuked, like you said, every single day, right? Whether it's at home or at school. So how do we support these families, or how do you support the families and the teachers? Because I know you talk across schools and administrators and everything like that, into understanding how to better support than just, this back and forth of do it, and then if you don't do it, you're task avoidant.
Well, I guess what is the rebuke? What does the rebuke look like?
Right. So the things I've seen usually, I don't know if you've seen this as well. So some of the things I've observed are, okay, that's it. You didn't complete this task. You're going to get a punishment for that, right? And the punishment will look like you're not going here on Sunday. Let's say they had planned somewhere, canceled. That's one of the punishments I've seen. Another type of punishment that I've seen is just more in the format of screaming, yelling, raising your voice and saying, come on, stop it. You have to do this already, right? Why aren't you getting this done? And the child is, as the yelling match goes back and forth, it becomes increasingly, from my observation,
Correct.
reluctant to engage,
Correct.
and then they shut down, and then they don't do anything.
Yes. So those 2 rebukes that you mentioned are absolutely horrible rebukes. The first is the first thing is losing the experience on the weekend of we were going to go somewhere, now we're not going to go somewhere. Number one, that is far too delayed of a consequence. The ADHD brain is not going to connect something they did wrong on a Tuesday with a consequence on Saturday. That is far too delayed, far too in the future. And that's, the ADHD time blindness, time horizon, all of those sorts of things. So that's not going to improve the behavior. We don't do a rebuke, a consequence, a punishment, quote unquote, unless it's going to positively impact that behavior and try to eliminate it. And having a delayed consequence like that is not going to eliminate it. Second on, the number one thing the ADHD brain needs the most is experiences. Getting getting out of the house and doing things. So the last thing you want to take away from an ADHD child is something that's going to get them out of the house. You know, what we see with ADHD kids now is they wake up, they go to school, they come home, they stay home, and they live in their comfort zone. And we know that no growth comes from the comfort zone. So if you're stealing an experience from this child, that's not good. That's like stealing recess. Like, just no, 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 100 times no. And then the second thing, the yelling, the screaming, the arguing, the negotiating, that is feeding into the behavior. The ADHD brain is a true neurodiverse brain that is negative attention stimulating. So the ADHD brain, the way it's built, would rather hear "stop that" than "good job." They get more dopamine from negative attention than positive attention. Their instant gratification brain, time-blind instant gratification brain, which is always focused on what gives me the most dopamine right now, their brain is constantly in dopamine seeking mode. So they're seeking out screens or conflict. Screens or conflict. Those are the two things that give them absolute dopamine tsunamis. So they're always looking for screens to get a rush of dopamine.
Right.
And if screens aren't available, they're going to find ways to create conflict. And who better to get conflict from than the unconditional love relationships of mom and dad, most often mom. You open a dictionary, you look up unconditional love, it's a picture of a mom. Who gets the worst of ADHD behaviors? Mom. This is why you have so many parents of ADHD kids who are just horrible at home. They'll call the school and they'll say, you know, and they'll describe the way the kid is at home, and the school will be like, are we talking about the same kid here? He's amazing here. We don't see any of those behaviors because school is structured with conditional relationships and home is unstructured with unconditional relationships. And the black and white ADHD brain has a very hard time dealing with unstructured and unconditional. So when the second parents start using too much language, start negotiating, arguing, you're feeding into that behavior. All ADHD behaviors need an audience. And the second parents are dysregulated and they're providing an audience to negative behaviors, they're giving them the dopamine they need. They're winning. It's working. It's not malicious. It's not a character flaw. Their brain is just doing what works, and you can't blame them for it. And the fact of the matter is, all kids emotionally manipulate their parents. All kids provoke their parents. All kids mess with their parents. You and I both did to our parents. Just ADHD
I
kids.
never messed with my parents.
Exactly. But ADHD kids just are going to do it 1,000 times more often in frequency.
So that's so fascinating because I like the way you explain the dopamine hit, right? I mean, ADHD is all about getting that dopamine hit in different ways, one of which is attention and negative attention. So the more negative attention you give them, the more they're going to be dysregulated and not do whatever you want them to do because they want more attention in that way. Now you're trying to get this individual, this teen, this tween, this younger child to complete this task or even initiate, because initiation is such a big part of it. And they say, no, I'm just not doing it. Right. So then how can we help them start the task without having that back and forth? And I know it's a gradual buildup of different things that you can do with the child, but as opposed to the more common rebukes that I've seen.
Well, the very first thing, and the reason why parent training is the number one most evidence-based thing for ADHD and executive functioning, is you have to make sure the path of least resistance is not available to this child. So if screens and conflict are available to them, they're going to choose that over anything you ask them to do. It's, hey, do your homework, brush your teeth, go take a shower, go call your friend, go outside, go join that club, sport activity. They're going to say no to every single one of those things if the other option is be on my phone. If the other option is play a video game, if the other option is Fortnite, Roblox, Minecraft, YouTube, they're going to choose those things 1,000 times out of 1,000 times, period. And if an angry, dysregulated parent is available to them to argue, fight, and negotiate and complain to them, then yes, they would rather get into a 3-hour fight than do the thing you're asking them to do. So you need to make sure those things are not available to them. After that, we need to look at more appropriate scaffolding. Move away from using so much language. Verbal directives don't work for ADHD kids. When you tell an ADHD kid, go put your shoes on, you're giving them two options. They can put their shoes on and hear a quick, hey, good job. Or they can not put their shoes on and have you chase them around the house for 3 hours. So we have to be very, very careful not to use directive language. I'm a huge fan of declarative language from speech pathologist Linda Murphy, who I'm sure you know, who wrote the Declarative Language Handbook. You can definitely check that out. And that's a great way to trigger nonverbal working memory and not trigger that fight flight response and get them sort of
Hmm.
thinking. Like, for example, it's the night before school, and instead of saying, hey, go pack your lunch, you say, I wonder how you're going to feel at lunch tomorrow. I wonder what you might need. Just, saying out loud of like putting it on their shoulders to figure it out themselves and do it themselves. That's what builds independence. And also using things like visuals to replace the verbal prompt, giving them visuals of what they're supposed to do and get out of there. Because remember, all ADHD behaviors need an audience. So you provide those scaffolds, alter the environment first, no screens, no conflict, and then begin the scaffolding.
Yeah. And shout out to Linda Murphy for
Linda
the declarative.
Murphy. Yep. Linda
Yeah,
Murphy. Yep. Yep.
because I've been using her work for many years because of a program I was in, and I didn't know that she takes the credit for that.
Oh,
But
yeah.
the declarative language piece, it's interesting because we use it also with individuals who may or may not have ADHD, but definitely have autism, the old school Asperger's, and social thinking challenges, because the way we can teach, I mean, you can't really teach social, and I guess you can't really directly teach executive functioning either, right? Because both of those things require experience sharing, right? And observation and noticing together. Because if you give a directive to someone with autism, for example, yeah, that's not going to mean anything. Like, go play with the kid, or go try to take turns. Instead, it's kind of like, I'm noticing that this individual is, frustrated. I wonder why they're frustrated. Maybe it's because you went into their space, and kind of letting them kind of lead the way a little bit more so that they can make their own observations. Is it safe to say that that approach works for individuals with ADHD, that power of observation along with declarative language?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So all of that is very, very important. Is in terms of observing the child in the natural environment, and the declarative language is really what triggers that nonverbal working memory. And as we know, all executive functioning starts with nonverbal working memory. So we need to build up those internal systems, because all executive functioning is the ability to stop yourself from what you would have done on impulse. There's that word impulsive, that's so synonymous with these kids. They're so impulsive,
Hmm.
so impulsive. They stop themselves from that impulsive thought and instead stop and think. And what is that stop and think? Visualizing, talking to yourself, and then doing. So you're not always doing plan A, plan A, plan A, which is the impulsive thought. You're instead doing plan B, plan C, plan D, which is far more educated and thought out.
So I have a question that's a little bit in a different direction, that I'm really curious to tap your brain about. So, executive functioning and ADHD, as you say, ADHD is executive functioning. It is a
Correct.
dysregulated system of executive functioning. Have been worked on by, like you said, many psychologists, many different modalities. Then we have our OTs and our SLPs, and then we have our EF coaches, right? Who maybe got a certificate in EF training, and I don't know what their background is. They don't necessarily have a background in either. Is there one person that can actually access these individuals? I know it's a holistic approach in general, but I know the SLP has to work on it, the OT has to work on it, and then there's an EF coach sometimes working on it. Is there, like, I feel like almost it's become a sort of work that doesn't have a specific person that's working on this.
You are correct. And you really can't go off of the general license anymore, or sort of those sorts of things. You know, uh, starting first overall, yes, if you're going to have someone with an SLP or an OT, they have, master's degrees working with kids for a very long time. That's great. But what parents have to know and other therapists have to know is that certificate for coaches. Calling yourself an executive functioning coach it's a totally unregulated field. None of those certificates are actually real certificates. Those are just things that you pay for from a third party company, and they give you a little logo you can put on your website. Anybody can make a website and say, I'm an
Right.
executive functioning coach. It's non clinical, there's no background needed, you don't need any experience, nothing. And those are the individuals that tend to focus on time management, organization. They'll come to your house and they'll watch your kid work on those ridiculous Chromebooks, and they'll watch the
Hate those
kid.
Chromebooks.
Yep, they'll watch the kid do the work, and they'll watch them while they work to make sure they don't have 75 different tabs open at once, and they'll make sure they're not sneaking YouTube time during homework, and they'll just watch them. And then when the clock hits the end of the hour, they leave. And now you have an ADHD child who is very highly prompt dependent on an adult, on a very
So no,
on a very expensive adult. So none of the internal skills we're training. You just created a very expensive Band-Aid. I think it's we need to be very clear about people's experiences. So it's not just your license. It's not just your master's degree. You need, how many Sarah Ward trainings have you done? Do you know who Dr. Russell Barkley is?
mhm.
You
Do you
know,
know who Dr. McLeoud is?
Yeah, I'm not a doctor, but
Doesn't matter.
yeah,
We
exactly.
earned it. We worked
Yeah,
hard.
yeah,
Yeah.
but you have to know who Dr. Russell Barkley is, and you have to
Yes.
understand that sort of connection. Like, you have to know that this is not about attention and hyperactivity and attentiveness. This is executive functions, which are the greatest predictor of success for human beings.
Absolutely. And on the flip side of that, you have SLPs who have general training. We come out of graduate school and we have general training. We're general SLPs. Then we go and we develop specialties as we go along. And then there are some that just know more about executive functioning and others that are just starting to learn. I mean, now more than ever, I see people really developing their skills in this. But again, for some people, it's just the beginning and they still don't understand it. And then you have also occupational therapists that work on self-regulation, but don't necessarily understand the whole package. And that's also because, again, they also have general training. So I feel like that's an important distinction as well, right? That not everybody is necessarily trained in executive functioning as a speech and language pathologist
No,
or
not at all. Not
occupational
at all.
therapist.
No, no. When you're getting your master's degree and you're taking out those hundreds of thousands of dollars of student loans, you don't get to walk into a class and tell the professor what you want to be taught. You show up and whatever's on that PowerPoint, you take as gold. And, during my experience, I think I learned about executive functioning for maybe a day.
Hmm.
Maybe it was on a couple of slides.
Yeah.
It was all of the work I did once I was out in the field. I knew nothing about ADHD and executive
Yes.
functions
So
when I had my master's degree.
it's the same on my end. That's why I was bringing it up because, again, there was no class on executive functioning. I don't know if there is now, but there wasn't when I went, and I guess when you went, and maybe it was touched upon, like you said, but it was never mentioned in a way like when I had finished my graduate school program, I didn't know that executive functioning was part of the package. It was only once I ended up in this program with individuals with autism, which who many had ADHD, that executive functioning was even brought into the mix. But the general SLP in the school setting, let's say, from my experience, doesn't necessarily know that much about executive functioning. And I know that you're doing some things to change that. So what are some of the things that you've been working on, like in terms of helping other SLPs or educators in general in schools understand this piece that is very, very prevalent, I mean, across the board in
Yeah,
schools?
so this is really my general role now as I travel the country and internationally. I've been to just about every state now, multiple countries,
Wow.
performing professional development for schools. I do a lot of keynote speaking, a lot of professional development for professional schools, organizations, because that's what I find really just ends up helping the most people. When you educate teachers and empower teachers, when I do parent training sessions and empower large numbers of parents at once, that's what ends up trickling down. When you empower parents to finally do something about screens, when you empower parents to be able to walk away from dysregulation, when they can bring some structure into the home, because there's never been a harder time to be a teacher and there's never been a harder time to be a parent. Because there's billion-trillion-dollar industries that are preying on, kids these days, and that affects the people who take care of the kids, who the kids are dependent on, which is the parents and the teachers. I was listening to a great podcast the other day from Dr. Jared Cooney Horvath, who wrote The Digital Delusion, and
Mm,
he was kind of breaking down how, everyone's talking about how teachers are leaving the field in droves
yes.
now and today, and it's like, oh, because they don't get paid enough. Well, teachers have the same salary now they had 30 years ago.
Right.
They weren't leaving the field in droves 30 years ago. The only
Right.
difference is now, let's be honest, kids are crazier. They're more dysregulated. And
Uh-huh.
you walk into any classroom nowadays, it's 10% teaching, 90% behavior management.
Mm-hmm.
We are in the middle of an absolutely horrible youth mental health crisis, and we're seeing it in their dysregulation every single day. 10-year-olds are acting like 5-year-olds and so forth. And this is because we stole the crucial things out of childhood that are crucial to their development, which is play, unstructured, outdoor, unsupervised play, which is crucial to brain development, success, and mental health. Boredom, kids aren't bored anymore. Boredom is so crucial to the brain, and we strengthen our executive functions through boredom. And then struggle. We're over accommodating kids with 1,000-page 504 plans with every accommodation in the book, and we're saving them from struggle every single day. So we steal, play, boredom, and struggle don't allow them to organically develop executive functioning skills. And they're only able to self-regulate when they have a screen in front of them. And now we're giving them screens at school, which has been an absolutely unmitigated disaster. So kids are struggling because of the world we're giving them.
Wow. This actually gave me chills because this is bad. This is really bad news. But there is hope. I know there is hope. But yeah, I mean, I as someone who is in a school, has been in a school setting for a while, I just thought maybe it's just the schools I've been in, or I guess because the time before, there was never a time before screen time. I always had screen time, since I've been in the workplace. But yeah, from what I see going on, it's just consistent dysregulation. And there's only like a few students in the class who remain regulated. And typically, those are the more passive individuals. They may not be regulated at all, but their internal, as Jesse Ginsburg, the sensory SLP, calls them, the Eeyores, right? So they're good at keeping it in. But to your point, screens, right? Digital. What do we do about this? Because I know Sarah Ward speaks a little bit about this too, in terms of putting settings on like Brick, or there are a few other ones that can monitor screen time or block YouTube. But again, you have to be careful with that, right? Because like you said, conflict is something that individuals with ADHD, especially children and teens, really like. So if you just start, putting these settings on the digital piece, they could view that as an opportunity to kind of figure a way out of it. Especially some of my teens are so techy that I work with.
Yeah.
So what do you do? Do you take the phone away, put it in a box, lock it up? Like how do we help this so that it
You
doesn't explode?
you eliminate the screens completely. We were all sold a total lie from big tech that that this tech was going to make kids safe, smart, and social. We now have a decade of data that tells us it makes them depressed, dormant, and depressed, dormant, and dependent, and antisocial. So they were sold as these social tools that's going to make them smart and be ready for a tech-filled future. And now we know all of that is false. We have the first wave of Gen Z applying to tech jobs, and none of them are getting the jobs because they'd have no resilience, no grit, no communication skills, and no ability to be away from technology at all. They're just, they're complete drug addicts towards their phone. So I'm making it a personal mission of my career to completely end ed tech and go back to textbooks and paper and pen and all those sorts of things, and what actually worked, because this generation, Gen Z, is the first generation in human history to do worse than the generation before them. All throughout human history, humans advance, advance, advance. Gen Z, growing up with screens, growing up with one-to-one laptops, are performing far worse than the group before them. And there's go ahead and blame processed foods. Go ahead and blame Red 40. No,
Blame parents,
yeah,
right?
exactly. Blame parents, blame teachers. It's technology. We got duped. We got duped by Apple. We got duped by Google. We got duped by all these people throwing tech in kids' face saying they need experience with it. Meanwhile, we have an entire generation of millennials like you and I that work with computers every single day that had no tech growing up, and we're completely fine with it, and we know what we're doing. So the concept that you need to experience tech as a kid to be ready for a tech-filled world is a flat out lie. And we now have an entire generation of dysregulated kids. And every single parent just yearns for, why can't they just have the skills to balance their tech? Just someone
Mm,
just teach them the skills so they can balance it. That's them
right.
saying, that's them parent saying in a nice way, I'm scared to put in limits. I'm scared to take it away. I'm scared to do these things. So please just teach him the skills, please. And they're trying to outsource it like it's someone mowing their lawn or someone cleaning their house. It's not going to happen.
Right.
You brought the tech into their lives. You're the only one who can take it out. And guess what? Limits don't work. Unless you are unless you are incredibly militant and you are really, really on top of things. Great, you're doing a great job. But especially if you have ADHD kids, that addiction is real and limits don't work. And we have to start looking at smartphones and technology the same way we look at alcohol, voting, driving, all of these different things that don't happen until much later in the teenage, young adult years.
Interesting. Okay, so there is a big problem here, a huge crisis going on, and
Hmm.
it's seen in the performance. Just these individuals, like you said, are applying to these tech jobs, and some of them are really tech savvy. They have really good tech skills, but then the interpersonal skills may not be so strong, or how to collaborate, be in an environment that's separate from the screen full time, right? That could pose as a challenge. And so it's hard for them to even get a spot in the workspace, even though some of them probably know technology way better than me. But
Well, what is knowing technology?
right,
Being good at YouTube and TikTok and Snapchat is not going to help you get a job. Being good at doom scrolling is not going to help you get a
no,
job.
absolutely
You
not.
know, oh, so they're good at tech.
Yeah,
There's employable good at tech and brain rot good at tech, and they're
exactly.
basically all brain rot good at tech.
Right. So you're describing them brain rot because I'm thinking of a lot of students that I've had who were really passionate about technology in a way where they wanted to be a software engineer or hardware engineer. So they had to really put in the work with direct technology, with learning how to use that technology. So it wasn't necessarily TikTok or doom scroll or anything like that. So there is space for that, right? The problem with all though still remains, which is that a lot of times while they're working on these things, they're also having YouTube open simultaneously. So it's a difficult balance to strike if you want to even attain a space in the tech world because
Yeah,
you're studying for tech, using tech, and then getting distracted by other things on your screen,
correct. Yeah, so
even
certain
if you don't have ADHD. What?
Yes. Certain websites are going to have to be blocked. You're going to have to really, make sure that they're using that computer time productively. Because if you're studying to be a software engineer, that's a very, very, very specific, very, very hard thing to do. And if there's actual work on a laptop, then there's entertainment. And entertainment does nothing but rot the brain and hardwire it towards instant gratification. So you need to be very careful about how tech's being used, and it needs to be supervised because the internet is the most dangerous place in the entire world. It is. All of the bad people now are not outside. The outside world has never been safer for a kid. It's the internet that is the most dangerous place for a child or a teenager. And we're, just like Jonathan Haidt says in The Anxious Generation, we overprotect kids in the real world, we underprotect kids on the virtual world. And millions and millions of parents read The Anxious Generation. They read it, they were emotionally moved by it. The only problem is they finished it, they closed it, put it back on the bookshelf, and did nothing about it. Because the whole thought of having to cancel your kid's cell phone plan or get rid of that Xbox, PlayStation, Switch is absolutely terrifying. Because if you do that, they're going to withdraw. And you're going to
Yeah.
have to watch your child withdraw and show withdrawal symptoms for 2 to 3 weeks. And no parent wants to see that.
Yeah, withdrawal symptoms and also the anger manifested at you. I mean, I remember I was caught in a difficult position because I had a family member, I'm not going to call you out on here, who basically did this TikTok and it was just a little inappropriate. And I was concerned because on TikTok you could get reported. And that's another thing. You don't want something where you're going to get reported for it and then, it follows you or whatever it may be. And so I ended up speaking to the parent about it. And I got a text. I actually just found it the other day. This was years ago. She's much older now, but the text was, "Get out of my life. I don't want you in my life anymore. Like, stay out of it. Like, this has nothing to do with you." And the anger, right? That's a very scary feeling. And I wasn't even the parent, but I felt like, oh my gosh, I think I'm losing this individual in my family, right? And so I get the fear. There really is a fear of, wait, the child's going to withdraw, not potentially really be angry at me because if they had the PlayStation for 5 years or they were accessing TikTok for all these years and now no more, like, that could take a long time to repair.
Well, it typically takes around 2 to 3 or sometimes even 4 weeks to detox the brain from screens. But parents need to think, hey, can I go through hell for 3 to 4 weeks and not have to deal with a screen addicted teen for the next 5, 6 years? You need to be able to deal with the short-term battles for long-term success. Sometimes you just have to admit your mistake and say, hey, I gave them too much tech too soon. Their brain's not ready. They can't handle the stimulation. It happens. And you need to be a strong, authoritative parent because you're going to hear it all. You're going to hear that you're the worst parent ever and you're ruining their life and
Mm-hmm.
they're going to lose all their friends and you're the meanest parent and none of my friends have tech limits. All of my friends have phones. No one's going to want to talk to me.
Right.
All we talk about at lunch is phone-based things. Now I'm going to have nothing to talk about. What am I going to do if I don't have my Roblox? Everyone only talks about Roblox. You're going to hear the same emotional manipulation things that every single kid says on the basic script, pulling at your heartstrings. But you as the parent got to look at the mountains of facts and data out there that technology is a drug and it is harmful to kids and it greatly increases the chances of suicide, self-harm, depression, mental illness, and further failure to launch.
It's interesting that you say that. As an anecdote to that, I do have a niece, and she went to summer camp for 2 months a few years ago, and she was, I think, at the time maybe like 13.
Mm-hmm.
And she said she had felt the most free and the least amount of anxiety when she was in that camp because they take the phones away for the whole summer. And to me, that spoke volumes because it seems like you're saying that this mental health crisis is really directly correlated. Suddenly, anxiety is no longer present when you're in this camp setting. I mean, I'm sure there's other types of anxiety that may manifest, but it's this freedom that she was
Yeah,
describing, this
there you go.
liberation, and
And
yeah,
the million dollar question is when this is your niece you're talking about?
yeah,
When she came home from that camp, did she get her tech back?
yes,
There you have it. So
right.
that's the mistake that every single parent makes. And summer camps now are marketing themselves as the only tech-free experience your child will ever have.
So you
Because
have to
now
pay.
so that's a very smart way for summer camps to market themselves and say, "Hey, your kids will be tech-free." But the parents make the mistake and give the kids the tech back after they're already detoxed. So, that's the problem is they go to summer camp, they have the time of their lives. Their brain is healthy. They're outside. They're playing. They're bored. They're having real social experiences, real varied experiences. They come home, brand new child, brand new brain, and then here's your phone that you just didn't have for the past 2 months. So that's the mistake parents make is they give it back. When if you send your kid to sleepaway or some kind of summer camp and they come home, that phone needs to be gone. The video games need to be gone. All of those things need to be fully eliminated from the house.
Okay. So it seems like your approach works, and the approach is simply, not simply, but get rid of first. If you're going to do anything to support, the first step is get rid of the digital device. Get rid of it. That's it. No
Well, this
access to it.
Well, this
Right?
well this takes me back to my original point I discussed in the beginning of the podcast that the ADHD brain is the path of least resistance brain. So if a screen is available to them, there's no chance of them doing any non-screen based task. Parents, I hear from ADHD parents every day, why won't my kid just do the task? Why won't he
Hmm.
do his homework? Why won't he do his chores? Why won't he take a shower? Why won't he brush his teeth? Why won't he call a friend? Because it's so much easier and so much more dopamine producing to just doom scroll all day and just be on your phone all day or be on Fortnite, Roblox, and Minecraft all day. So if those things are available to them, they're always going to choose it to the point where parents have convinced themselves of let me get him in therapy so the therapist can teach him how to do non-screen based tasks. The therapist can teach him to have a balance and balance screens so I don't have to be the bad guy and get rid of the phone. The therapist can do it. Well, that's not going to happen. You're going to waste your money, you're going to waste your time, and that is the definition of a pipe dream. It's not going to happen. So if you want your child to eventually get on the road to develop executive functioning skills, the path of least resistance has to be removed and not be available to them, which is screens and conflict. So screens have to go first, brain detox from screens. The audience of the parents responding to negative attention and giving them dopamine through conflict also has to be removed through parent training. So once the brain is detoxed from screens and conflict, the brain is now ready to learn, primed to learn.
Right.
Now we can start to focus on these skills. So the approach is not simply just to remove screens. If you want the brain to be ready to learn, the path of least resistance has to be removed first.
Got it. Okay. So, in the case of individuals that have difficulty with interacting with others, some of them resort to using video games to socialize, right? And that becomes like a form of social communication. Also, they may be part of outside clubs, and in school they may be interacting, but due to maybe having autism and other things, that is a primary form of social interaction for them. What would you say to a family that is dealing with that piece?
I would say that that is not a form of social communication in any way, shape, or form. Playing online Roblox, Fortnite, Minecraft, even if you're FaceTiming the person, even if you're doing Discord through them, in no way, shape, or form is that a real social experience, period. It's sold to you as a social experience, it's marketed to you as a social experience, but in no way, shape, or form is that ever going to replace face to face communication at all. Doing that online video games is never going to improve your quality of life and is never going to make you ready for college and career beyond that. So that right there, the concept that video games are a social experience is us getting duped by big tech's perfect marketing scheme. And it's a shame that there's so many people on social media with all their pseudoscience pushing that narrative, but
Yeah.
it is a completely false narrative.
Yeah, I know. It's fascinating because it's a narrative that actually, until now, I actually bought partially into. I didn't think that people should socialize only remotely, right? But I thought that maybe that can support someone, especially during COVID. But COVID was a whole nother beast. COVID no longer, I mean, COVID still exists, but is no longer dominating our lives as much as it did. So essentially now, why 6 years later, right, are we still doing the same things we were doing then? And I
Correct.
sometimes even hear about the elimination of brick and mortar schools, and why should we just not have our students remote? And I think in some states, actually, there's like a 4-day work week now, or 4-day school week rather. And on the fifth day, they log on remotely. So when I
Horrible.
first heard about this idea, I remember I was getting my master's in educational administration, and there was a professor speaking about this. And it's interesting because like a lot of the class members, I felt like a black sheep, but they thought that this was a really great idea for the future. This was during COVID, and they thought that this was great, and this was being proposed to many people. And the professor, who is very esteemed, stated that, well, what's the difference? Like, being remote already, we always had remote schooling. We always had students learning remotely when they lived really far away from a local school. So what's the difference? And look how well they're doing now. Although I don't think they ended up doing that well. I mean, I
No.
know because I was actually in the trenches with them, but
No, that puts them at a massive disadvantage. This is like what schools do now when there's snow days. They become virtual learning days. Or when it's raining and the kids can't go outside for recess, they stay inside on their Chromebooks. It's absolutely horrible what we're doing to these kids. Like there's no like this is clearly why there's a youth mental health crisis. And we do these things, and then we're surprised they have big behaviors. They're surprised that the classrooms and the schools are pure chaos. We're surprised that so many kids are getting outside therapies, and we're having Adderall shortages and medication shortages and all these diagnoses and all these huge fights
right.
in the IEP room, and teachers are leaving the field in droves. We act surprised when these things happen, but we throw technology in their face.
Yep. I have a final question, and for the sake of time, since my time management skills are not the best, and I can talk forever and ever, but I have a final question, and this is about AI. Okay, so tech and AI. So, of course, a lot of people are saying that we have to learn AI, because if we don't learn AI, we're going to fall behind. And so we have to know how to use it appropriately. I myself use AI a little bit here and there, but now we're bringing students into the fold, right? Where they're accessing AI. What do you think, or what do you, hopefully, this is a positive for the future, but what do you envision for the future in terms of AI and how students interact with it? Or how do you hope that they interact with it? Or not
It's
at all?
it's just like with the rest of this tech-filled world, it's making people skills and communication skills that much more important. Because, like a couple of years ago, it was, oh, everyone drop what you're doing and use all your life savings to become a coder and go to coding camp and become a coder. Now, no one's doing that anymore because AI does it for you. So AI is going to make it pretty obsolete to have memorized a lot of the academic material that schools teach. So it's going to become more and more important to be a people person, to communicate, look someone in the eye, be flexible, and have these kind of skills. And, just like with technology, there's very basic, just like we talked about earlier with that engineering scenario.
Yeah.
There's very basic use of technology, which is 99% of people. And then
Mhm.
1% of people are specialized and they become engineers. So this whole concept of know how to use AI, they're going to know how to use AI. It's pretty basic using AI. You type in a question, it answers it for you. It's pretty easy to do. So, it's not about we have to teach them how to use it. It's just becoming a natural part of the world, just like technology is. So, unless they're going to become an AI developer someday, and it's that less than 1% of person, whatever. But we want to keep them away from this AI. We as adults need to recognize the world is changing and things are becoming more AI based. So the job market's going to look different. Unemployment is going to rise, and everything's going to look different in terms of the world that we're raising our kids into. But in general, we need to focus on them having real childhoods with play, boredom, and struggle.
The way we grew up.
Yeah, the 90s.
Oh, so much fun, right? Getting called in, dinner's waiting for you, or
Yep,
supper back in the
yep.
day. Michael, I can't thank you enough for being on this podcast because you're one of, not the only guests, but few guests that did not sugarcoat a thing. You said it like it is. You didn't shy away from the fact that this is your belief. You wholeheartedly believe in this. And I think that there isn't enough work being done in straight up saying, the device cannot be there. And so I really hope that people listen to this, embrace it, and find a way to cut out the devices from these individuals because it's doing more harm than good overall.
Exactly. And the information I presented today, it's not like I'm just saying my beliefs. All of the data is out there. We're in a horrible youth mental health crisis, and ed tech's been a failure. Technology has been a failure. You know, p- but the thought of the opposite of it, the thought of getting out of it is so scary and so daunting that people just start to tell themselves cognitive distortions of, no, it's okay. Let's teach them limits. Let's do this. And that's when the sugarcoating comes in, because the thought of having to remove technology is so scary.
It is.
Let me create these cognitive distortions
Right.
to keep the tech. So basically, everything I'm saying is based on what we're currently dealing with.
Hmm.
There's no point in sugarcoating it when our kids' lives are at stake here.
Wow. I really do appreciate the honesty and the passion. And I really hope that you are the start of a movement, a larger movement, because I don't think there is a big enough movement yet against this. I think that, like you said, parents are scared naturally. I think that schools are maybe stuck in doing what they're used to doing and they've advanced so much because of COVID. Like they're beyond that already. So much of what kids are doing is online just for school. But I really hope that, somehow we can take a step back and give these kids their childhoods back again. So, and I guess that, not to make it political, but our mayor, the mayor of New York City, did give a snow day, and that was great because they could play outside. Whereas one of the other days was a remote day. Again, they had to not go outside. So you would say that give them the snow day, right? Give them the opportunity to play outside, right?
Every parent listening to this, the next time you have a snow day and they say remote learning, do not even log in. Do not make your kid log in. Take the absence. Who cares? They're not going to fall behind. Send your kids outside and play. That is far more beneficial than anything they're going to learn on a computer. Bring back snow days. Virtual learning days should be illegal.
Wow. Okay. On that note, thank you so much for all of the information. I think this is going to be great. I think the listeners will be able to obtain so much information, not just the parents, not just the professionals listening, but the neurodivergent individuals themselves who are struggling with this. Maybe
Absolutely.
they'll hear this and say, let me rethink some of what I'm doing here. Maybe I need to take a break. So, one final thing, where can everybody find you?
Sure. Yeah. So my website is GrowNOWADHD.com. You can also follow me on Instagram at GrowNOWADHD. My two books are now available: the Executive Functioning Playbook,
Playbook,
the
yeah.
the actual book, and the Playbook in Action Workbook. So you can find all the information on my website, GrowNOWADHD.com.
Thank you so much, Michael, for
Yeah. Thank you,
being
Sharon.
on.
Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Lovely conversation. Thanks for joining us on Unmasking Social, where we neurodiverse advocates and those who support them explore how real friendship begins when we start showing up as ourselves. If today's episode resonated with you, Please share it with a friend, leave a review, or follow me for more conversations that provide information on neurodivergent ways of thinking, communicating, and connecting. Until next time, keep staying social.